I've been inside a lot of expensive houses, and after a while they all start to blur together. Clean counters nobody cooks on. Huge windows. Quiet rooms that feel staged even when somebody lives there. My job is simple. Show up, fix the lock, make sure the latch sits right, test the keys, get paid, leave. I'm good at it because I don't act like I belong there. People trust you faster when you move like you're already halfway out the door. Jenny's place should have been one more house like that. The call was for a side entry that wasn't catching right and a deadbolt she wanted changed. Nice neighborhood, long drive, trimmed hedges, one of those houses that looks calm in a way that almost feels expensive by itself. When she opened the door, I forgot for a second why I was there. She was older than me by a lot, but not in a way that made her feel distant. She looked polished without looking like she tried too hard. Dark blouse, fitted pants, hair pinned back loose enough to look natural. Calm face, steady eyes. The kind of woman who made you feel noticed without doing much at all. "Charlie?" she asked. I nodded and lifted my tool bag a little. "Lock and latch." She smiled once, small, like she already knew more than I did. "Come in." Most clients either hover too much or disappear the second you start working. Jenny did something worse. She stayed nearby, but not close enough to call it hovering. Ever had that weird feeling where you're supposed to be the one working, but you're the one being watched? Tell me your story in the comments. She leaned against the kitchen counter where she could see the side hall, asked normal questions in a voice that made normal questions sound less normal, and watched me work like she had all day and had decided this was the part she didn't want to miss. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked while I had the deadbolt apart. "Few years." "You like being inside other people's houses that much?" I looked over at her. She wasn't smiling now, just watching. "It's not really about the houses," I said. "It's mostly screws and bad decisions." That got a real smile out of her. "That sounds like most of life." I should have kept my head down after that, but the whole place had started to feel off balance. Not wrong, just charged. Every time I explained something, she listened too closely. Every time I reached past the door frame or bent to line up the strike plate, I could feel her attention on me in this quiet, steady way that got under my skin. When I finished the install, I set the new keys on the entry table and tested the lock twice more. Smooth turn, good fit, clean click. "All set," I said. "You've got these, and I can leave the code for the lock model in case you ever want copies cut." She picked up one of the keys and turned it between her fingers. "Do you ever keep spares?" I shrugged. "Not unless somebody asks." "And if somebody asked?" I looked at her again. Same calm face, same unreadable tone. "Then I'd keep one." She held my eyes for a second too long, then set the key down. "Maybe you should." I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do. "That sounds like something I probably shouldn't agree to on a work visit." "Probably not," she said and moved past me toward the kitchen. Still, that one word stayed with me all through the invoice, all the way to my truck, all the way through my next stop. I told myself she was just playing around. Rich people got bored. Sometimes they liked seeing if they could make a guy uncomfortable and still keep that clean, composed face like nothing happened. By the time I got home, I had almost talked myself out of it. Then I emptied my pockets onto the kitchen table. Wallet, phone, coins, receipt, and one brass key. I just stared at it. Small piece of white tape wrapped around the top. Neat handwriting. Back. I picked it up like it might explain itself if I held it long enough. My first thought was that I'd grabbed it by accident while cleaning up. My second thought was worse, that I hadn't grabbed anything by accident. I sat there for 10 minutes with that key in my hand, replaying every second in her house. The look she gave me, the way she asked about spares, the pause before she said maybe you should. None of it felt random anymore. For the next 2 days I got almost nothing done without thinking about it. The key stayed on my table where I could see it every time I walked past. I'd leave for work, come back, and the first thing I'd look at was that little piece of brass like it had changed while I was gone. I opened our message thread more than once, typed something dumb, erased it, locked my phone, picked it up again 10 minutes later. I told myself there had to be a practical reason. Maybe she wanted me available if the lock jammed. Maybe she was careless. Maybe she liked the reaction more than the idea. None of that felt true. Late on the third night, my phone lit up while I was lying on my couch pretending to watch something. Jenny. Just one message. I opened a bottle of wine. Back door is unlocked. I read that message 3 times before I moved. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I understood it too well. I changed my shirt twice like that mattered. Stood in my kitchen staring at the key. Then finally grabbed it and left before I could talk myself out of it. The whole drive over, my chest felt tight. Not panic exactly. More like that feeling right before you do something you already know is a bad idea. But you keep going because stopping now would feel even worse. The neighborhood was quiet when I pulled in. Big houses, low lights, clean driveways, nothing moving. I remembered what she'd said and parked a little farther down instead of right in front. Even that made it feel different. Like I wasn't visiting. Like I was already following rules. The brass key felt warm in my hand by the time I reached the gate. I went around the side of the house, past the trimmed hedges and the dark windows, and found the back door. For a second I just stood there listening. Nothing. No music. No TV. Just the soft hum of a house at night. I tried the handle first. Unlocked. My hand stayed on it a second too long. She'd said the door was unlocked. She'd made it easy. Still, I pulled out the key anyway and looked at it under the porch light. I wanted to feel what it meant. Then I slipped it back into my pocket, opened the door, and stepped inside. The house felt completely different at night. During the day, it had looked expensive. At night, it felt private. Dim lights over the kitchen. A lamp on in the living room. The counters clear. A bottle of wine open beside 2 glasses. The whole place softer somehow. Like this version of the house only existed after dark. Jenny was standing by the island like she'd been there the whole time. No surprise on her face. No awkward laugh. No speech about what this was or wasn't. "You came," she said. I shut the door behind me. "You told me to." A small smile touched her mouth. "No. I told you the door was open." That should have been the moment I turned around. Instead I just stood there looking at her, trying to act steady while my pulse was all over the place. She poured wine into one of the glasses and slid it toward me. "You always look this nervous off the clock? Only on the strange jobs. And this is a job?" I picked up the glass. "No." She nodded once like that was the right answer. What got me was how calm she stayed. She didn't rush anything. Didn't fill the room with talk. She made me come to her pace, and somehow that pulled me in harder than if she'd made it obvious. We stood in the kitchen drinking wine and talking in low voices like we'd done it before. Not huge life story stuff. Just little things. Where I grew up. Why I worked alone. Why she liked the house so quiet. Every now and then she'd look at me in that same steady way from the first visit, and it made the whole room feel smaller. At one point she reached out and straightened the front of my shirt like she had every right to. That tiny move hit harder than it should have. "You notice everything," she said. "It's kind of my thing." "Good," she said softly. "Then notice this." And after that, there wasn't much space left between us. I'm not going to drag that night out like it needs explaining. Didn't. That was the dangerous part. Nothing about it felt messy. Felt chosen. Controlled. Like she had opened one hidden door in her life and let me through it without ever saying the words out loud. When I left, it was late. She walked me to the back hall, not the front, and pressed the key into my palm even though I already had it. "Don't text me too much during the day," she said. I looked at the key, then back at her. "So this is actually happening?" She held my eyes for a second. "You came back, Charlie." I barely slept that night. Not because I regretted it. Because I couldn't stop replaying every second. The kitchen light on her face. The wine. The way she never once acted unsure. By morning I was useless. After that, it turned into a pattern faster than I expected. Not every night. That would have made too much sense. It was worse than that. Selective. A message at 10:30 asking if I was awake. A photo of a wine glass on the counter with no caption. One line saying side door. Another saying 20 minutes. I'd be in the middle of regular life, fixing a jammed deadbolt or changing a mailbox lock, and my phone would buzz and suddenly the whole day would tilt. I started knowing the rhythm of her house at night, which kitchen light she left on, which floorboard near the back hall made the faint sound, where she kept the opener, which cabinet had the good glasses. Sometimes we talked for an hour before anything happened. Sometimes she'd stand barefoot at the counter while I told her about some nightmare client and she'd laugh into her glass and say, "You hate people more than you admit." Sometimes she asked about my family. Sometimes she said almost nothing and just watched me like she was deciding something. And every time I left through the back, I told myself the same thing. This wasn't random. Couldn't be. Not with how she looked at me. Not with the way she kept bringing me back into that part of her life nobody else saw. I started thinking about her in the mornings, in traffic, on jobs, in the shower, all the time. The whole thing stopped feeling like a risk I was taking and started feeling like a place I was being allowed into. That was probably the moment I got in too deep. Because by then I wasn't thinking like a guy who should walk away. I was thinking like a guy who had been chosen. After a while, I stopped thinking of Jenny's house as a place and started thinking of it like a mood. Late light in the kitchen. Her voice low. The back door. My shoes always by the same mat. My hand reaching for the same cabinet without asking. It got familiar fast, and that was probably the worst thing that could have happened. Familiar makes people stupid. Familiar makes you start filling in blanks with whatever version helps you sleep. So when the first odd detail showed up, I barely let myself sit with it. I got there one night a little earlier than usual. She had sent me a message that just said come by around 9, and I was in the area, so I ended up there maybe 15 minutes ahead. I let myself in through the back like always, quiet out of habit, and when I stepped into the mudroom I stopped. There was a pair of men's shoes by the wall. Not old junk shoved in a corner. Not something dusty and forgotten. Nice leather shoes, clean, one tipped slightly over like somebody had kicked them off recently and not cared where they landed. I just stood there looking at them. Jenny came into the hall a second later and saw exactly where my eyes went. She didn't jump. Didn't scramble. She just said, "A friend left those after a dinner a while ago. I keep meaning to move them." Then she kissed me like that answered everything. And stupidly for that night it did. That was the pattern. Something would feel off, and then she'd pull me back in before I could hold onto the thought long enough to do anything with it. A hand on my wrist. A look. A quiet question about my day like I mattered more than whatever detail had caught my attention. A week later, she added a new rule. "Don't park in front anymore," she said while rinsing out a wine glass. I was leaning against the counter watching her. "I usually don't." "I know. Just make sure you don't." I tried to keep my tone light. "You expecting security patrols now?" She gave me a look over her shoulder. "Charlie." That was it. No explanation. Just my name in that even voice that meant stop pushing. I lifted a hand. "Okay." But I noticed the change. Before, the rules felt playful, almost part of the whole thing. Use the back. Keep it quiet. Don't text too much during the day. Now it started sounding more exact. Less like privacy, more like management. Then came the gaps. She used to answer at weird times, but she answered. Late afternoon, after dark, close to midnight. Enough to keep me on the line. Then all at once there were stretches where she disappeared completely. I'd send something simple, nothing heavy, and get nothing back for a full day. Sometimes two. Then a message would pop up like the silence hadn't happened. "Tonight? You up? Come by in 20. No mention of the gap. No apology. No reason. And every time I told myself not to make it a thing. She was older. She had her own life. Maybe that was part of why I liked being around her in the first place. She never acted like she owed anyone an explanation. Still, I started noticing how carefully I was kept in one part of her world. Kitchen. Back hall. Once in a while the living room if the curtains were drawn. Never the front rooms with all the big windows. Never the driveway side of the house. Never any daytime plan that lasted more than a message and a fast no. It was always the same hidden route in, same hidden route out. I knew which lamp she left on, but I didn't know half her schedule. I knew how she took her wine, but I didn't know where she went on weekends. And because I fix things for a living, details started sticking whether I wanted them to or not. A dark men's coat hanging in the laundry room one night. Not bagged up. Not stored away. Used. Heavy fabric, expensive. One sleeve turned inside out a little like somebody had shrugged out of it too fast. A razor on the bathroom counter that definitely wasn't mine. A framed photo in the hallway I caught only half a second of before she stepped between me and it and asked if I wanted another drink. The worst one happened on a Thursday. I was there later than usual. We'd been talking in the kitchen, and for once it felt easy again. I'd had a rough day, and she was in one of those moods where she actually listened, leaning against the counter with her arms folded, watching me complain about a client who wanted 3 locks changed and then argued over the bill. She laughed in the right places, touched my hand, made me feel like I was more than just some guy she called when the house was quiet. Then her phone lit up. I saw the screen glow on the counter. She looked down at it and everything about her changed. Not dramatic, just instant. Her shoulders tightened a little. Her face closed off. She picked up the phone, read one line and set it face down. "You need to go," she said. I actually laughed because I thought she was kidding. That fast? Yes. I looked at her. What happened? Nothing happened. I just need you to go now. The room had turned cold so quickly it made my chest feel tight. Jenny. She was already walking me toward the back hall. "Please don't make this difficult." That line stayed with me more than anything. Not because it was harsh. Because it sounded practiced. Like she'd used that tone before in some other part of her life where things had to be handled fast and clean. At the door, she touched my arm, softer again. Like she could feel me slipping away. "I'll text you," she said. I wanted to ask who was coming. I wanted to ask why I suddenly felt like a problem she needed out of sight. Instead I just nodded and left like an idiot. I sat in my truck at the end of the block for almost 10 minutes with the engine off. That's when I finally admitted it to myself. Something was wrong. Not in a vague way. Not in a jealous, insecure way I could laugh off later. Wrong in the plain, physical sense. The same way I can tell when a lock has been forced even if somebody polished the plate and cleaned up the marks. The signs were all there. I just hadn't wanted the answer. Even after that, I kept holding off on saying it out loud in my own head. Because once I did that, I knew the whole thing might crack open. A couple nights later, I was finishing up a lock change on the other side of town when I ended up 10 minutes from Jenny's place. That had happened before. Usually I'd wait a little, send something casual, and she'd either tell me to come by or go quiet until later. By then, I knew the pattern well enough that I didn't think too hard about it. I sat in my truck at a red light, pulled out my phone, and typed, "I'm nearby. Could stop over if you want." I sent it and drove another block, already half expecting my screen to light up. It did almost right away. "Not tonight. My husband is back in town." That was it. One line. I think I read it 4 or 5 times before the words actually settled into place. My husband is back in town. Not a joke. Not some weird excuse. Not something vague I could twist into a version that hurt less. My husband. Everything stopped moving for a second. I pulled into an empty lot beside a dark storefront and just sat there with the engine running. I could hear the air coming through the vents. I could hear my signal still clicking because I hadn't turned it off after the last turn. I remember that more clearly than I should. It's strange how fast a fantasy can die once the right sentence hits it. All at once, every piece of it snapped into place so cleanly it made me feel stupid. The back door, the side entrance, the rules about parking, the missing replies, the way she only wanted me there at certain times, the sudden coldness when her phone lit up, the shoes, the coat, the razor, the parts of the house I was never really allowed into. I hadn't been brought into her life. I'd been brought into the empty space inside it. That was the whole thing. I wasn't the man she had chosen in any real sense. I was the man she called when the house was quiet and the real one wasn't there. I was the gap filler, the convenient secret, the person who entered through the back because there was never supposed to be a front door version of me in the first place. And what made it worse was how quickly I understood that she had told me the truth in the coldest, simplest way possible. No apology, no scrambling, no attempt to soften it. Just a message that might as well have said the schedule changed. I stared at the screen for another minute, maybe two. My thumb hovered over the keyboard once, then dropped. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make me look smaller. No question I asked was going to improve the answer. No speech was going to turn the last few weeks into something else. I already had the full story now. Maybe not every detail, but enough. More than enough. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. The whole ride back, I kept one hand in my pocket wrapped around the brass key. I could feel the edges pressing into my palm every time I tightened my grip at a stoplight. Funny how something that had felt exciting at first now just felt embarrassing. Cheap, almost. Not because it was worthless metal, but because I had built a whole meaning around it that had never been there. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the TV or pour a drink or pace around like I was in some dramatic breakdown. I just stood in my kitchen with my keys, wallet, and phone in my hands, then set everything down on the table the same way I had the night I first found that piece of brass in my pocket. I picked it up and looked at the white tape still wrapped around the top. Back. That one little label suddenly said everything. Not front. Not main. Not welcome. Back. The hidden way in. The way you use when you're not part of the real picture. I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. Then I walked over to the trash can, dropped the key in, and let it fall all the way to the bottom. After that, I took out my phone, opened our message thread, and blocked her number before I could reread anything. No dramatic pause, no second look, just done. Then I sat down in the quiet. That was the part one didn't expect. Not anger, not even heartbreak exactly, just this flat, cold clarity. Like walking into a room after the power cuts back on and seeing what everything actually looks like. I stayed there for a long time, staring at nothing. The job had been over from the start. I just hadn't known which door I was really being asked to use.